y'all, Miss Osborne back again with another flip video. Today we're going to be talking about the Great War, which is pretty much the same thing as World War One. There was a lot of different things going on that led up to World War One. There was a lot of nationalism, the alliances were happening, and people were competing with one another that created conditions that were pretty conducive to the First World War. The objectives that we'll be focusing on in this video are: why was Europe on the brink of war in 1914, and then what happened on the Western Front? Gold Hawk historians will analyze the causes of World War I and how they contributed to the start of the war, and evaluate the extent to which new technologies affected the war effort. While you're watching, make sure that you're taking good notes in either Cornell or outline format, as we've talked about in class. If you need to pause or rewind the video, make sure that you're doing that so that you're taking good notes. In 1914, there was a lot of tensions in Europe between all the different European countries. It had the continent on the brink of war. There was four main factors that led to war. Get it? They spell out main: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Militarism was this idea that these European countries started to build up a stockpile of weapons, so they had excess weapons, and they also were increasing the size of their standing armies, which led to a lot of other European nations being like, why are they building up these weapons? Why are they having all these standing armies? And that made them on edge because they thought that an attack could happen at any time. European countries also were forming partnerships called alliances to protect themselves from potential attacks from other nations. The two main alliances that you need to know were the Allied powers and the Central powers. The Allied powers were France, Great Britain, and Russia, and eventually the United States joins in. The Central powers were Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Imperialism also led to World War I because these nations were competing with one another to keep and gain power over the other nations by maintaining and gaining new colonies. And then nationalism, this idea that you are loyal or have a devotion to your country or culture, had led to a lot of different revolutions within Europe during this time period and new countries, and had kind of disrupted the original balance of power that had been established by the Congress of Vienna after the French Revolution, and left these countries feeling a little uncomfortable. Some of the strongest nationalist tensions in the Balkans region of Eastern Europe were in Serbia, an independent nation. Serbian leaders wanted to spread their influence to other areas in which Serbians resided, but Austria-Hungary, their neighboring country, opposed Serbian expansion, worried that they might gain more power than them. In the midst of the tensions between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Franz Ferdinand, decided to visit the Sarajevo in Bosnia, an area with a large Serbian presence, and he was shot and killed by a Serbian man. Austria-Hungary blamed the death of Franz Ferdinand on Serbia and declared war against them on July 28, 1914. Now, this is where the alliances came into play. Russia had an alliance with Serbia and prepared to defend them if Austria-Hungary attacked. Germany had an alliance with Austria-Hungary and saw the Russian action as an attack and declared war on Russia. And then the other countries in alliances with Germany and Russia soon followed with declarations of war, and World War I was off to a running start. Germany faced the war on two fronts, the Western Front facing France and the Eastern Front facing Russia. German military leaders had been developing the Schieffelin Plan, which called for troops to quickly defeat France in the west, then head east to defeat the Russians. And it would have worked if they didn't get stuck in France. The first phase of the Schieffelin Plan led to an invasion of France through Belgium, a neutral country. Germany's attack on a neutral country, however, led to Great Britain also declaring war on Germany as well. So Germany's plans for a swift defeat of France quickly failed because the war came to a quick stalemate, or there was no side that was able to win. Forces on both sides began digging trenches, which were like deep, long ditches, to protect themselves from attack. The Battle of the Marne was one of the first battles of World War I, and the Allied powers were successful in driving the Germans back and were able to dig their own trenches of their own in the region of Upper France that became known as the Western Front. Now, the trench warfare was the fighting from the trenches was not something new, but a level of trench warfare was unprecedented. There was literally miles and miles and miles of trenches dug within France. Life in the trenches was pretty miserable. The trenches filled up with water, which would cause thick mud and unsanitary conditions. They were unable to remove the dead bodies, and lice, rats, and other creatures were constantly present. If you look in the picture on the right, you can see there's some people that are just like slumped over, but there's a lot of dirt, and it's very kind of rustic. Soldiers would be ordered over the top to attack the enemy and cross no man's land, the area between the opposing trenches. As a result of trench warfare, there was a lot of new weapons that were invented, two of which, poisonous gas and rapid-fire machine guns, were used specifically in the trenches. The poisonous gas was used to blind, choke, or burn victims, but it was really of little value because when the wind changed, it could eventually blow back in your face. And then also they invented gas masks, which prevented the attacks by the poisonous gas from being too lethal. The machine guns, however, were extremely effective because now they were able to shoot across no man's land and take out hundreds of soldiers at once. Tanks and aircraft were both first used in World War I. The tanks were used to cross the rough no man's land, trying to cross the craters and all the different barbed wire that was being used. And then aircraft were especially helpful because they were able to observe the enemy positions at the beginning of the war, and then by the end of it, they're able to strap machine guns onto it and make them lethal from the air. The nations fighting in World War I soon realized that fighting a war of this scale would require the use of all of the society's resources. This became known as total war, or when total resources were used for the war effort. New controls resulted in changes to the nation's industries and economy. The factories started to produce military equipment, and civilians started to conserve food and goods for military use. Governments also wanted to control public opinion to try to influence them to be positive and encourage the war effort through the use of propaganda. Propaganda is just any information that was designed to influence people's opinions. They were trying to influence them to support the war effort and be happy about the war. With men off at war, much of the work at home was done by the women. They worked in the factories, and they also worked as nurses, and then some volunteers gathered food shipments to send to troops. Major battles on the Western Front, that is the front in France, was the Battle of Verdun and the Battle of the Somme. Germany was making plans to attack the French fortress of Verdun because the whole purpose was to kill and injure as many French soldiers as possible, because the fortress was one of those that France kind of held near and dear to their heart. The battle killed nearly 400,000 French, but it's nearly the same number of Germans, and it resulted in a stalemate. The British launched their own attack to try to pull Germans away from Verdun at the Somme River in Upper France. Both sides lost an immense number of troops and resulted in a stalemate. There was also other fighting happening around the world. Other colonies and other nations that were allied with the European countries got into the battle as well. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers in late 1914 because they controlled the strategic position, the Dardanelles, a waterway that connected Europe with Russia and would be used specifically to connect the Allied powers with their ally, Russia. To destroy the guns and forts that lined the Dardanelles, though, the Allies would have to land on the Gallipoli Peninsula. But after about 2 months in Gallipoli, they had to give up the campaign because they were making no headway. Other fighting was also happening in Asia and Africa. Japanese forces that had allied themselves with Great Britain began attacking German colonies in China and the Pacific. And then other British and French troops started attacking German colonies in Africa as well. The Allied and Central Powers also used their colonies to supply troops for the war effort. Make sure that you read back over your notes and that you have all the necessary vocabulary. Thank you for joining me for this video, and I'll see you in class.